With a growing population, climate change, and geopolitical conflicts, feeding the world is perhaps one of the greatest challenges that humanity has ever faced. And Alberta has long been known as an agriculture and agri-food powerhouse. So how do we amplify our strengths and develop Alberta into a place that can feed the world through value-added agriculture? Welcome to a special series on the brief called Missions and Moonshots. I'm your host, Brittany Brander, and in this series, I talk to leading experts, business leaders, innovators, and thought leaders across Alberta and Canada to explore solutions to the world's biggest challenges in energy, agriculture, and health. My guest today is Dr. Larry Martin, principal at Agri-Food Management Excellence. Welcome to the show, Dr. Martin.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So in your paper, you make the argument that Alberta has many strengths that make it a good candidate to be a world leader in value-added agriculture, but we have a few barriers to overcome to get there. And we'll get into the details of what those are, but let's just set some context first. What is value add? And then can you give us an example?
Well, value added is a really straightforward concept. Basically, a value added product is one that's been enhanced to make it worth more than its raw material ingredients. So you might make it more convenient, you might make it more attractive, you might make it more palatable, you might make it easier to use, or transformed into a new product. Canola has some value when it's in farmer's field or in the farmer's bin. But located there, it's not worth much at all to somebody who wants to consume something in Vancouver or Los Angeles or Tokyo. It has more value when you transport it to a crushing plant for processing. It has even more value when it's made into canola oil or canola meal for animal feed. Taking the second one of those streams, the canola meal's value increases again when it's transported to a feedlot. It increases again when it's turned into an animal. It's increased again when hopefully anyway, it's increased again when the animal's turned into meat, and so forth on down the value chain. And you can do the same thing on the oil side. So value adding is simply doing something to make it worth more.
There's several criteria that you list that, you're evaluating certain jurisdictions on whether they are, leaders in value add versus, I don't want to say non-leaders, but people who are maybe have a little bit more gaps. So thinking about Alberta, this is kind of a two-part question. Where are we doing really well? Mm-hmm. And then where are, I would say, our opportunities to improve or our challenges?
Well, the obvious one where we're doing well is our location that gives us access to grains and oil seeds, wheat, pork, pulses, and increasingly now, and especially where there's irrigation, vegetable production, which is similar to other value-added centers like Minneapolis, St. Paul, or like California. We also have, especially in those irrigated areas, we have access to water, which makes it possible to grow things and grow them more efficiently. And I actually quite a few people are observing these days that climate change is actually moving in our favor. It's warming. It's warming the air. And the soil. It's increasing our growing season, so we can grow things more or better than we did before. So those are the obvious things. We're really good at basic production and so forth. Where we have the challenges is the number of issues. Number one is inconsistent access to labor. There's always coming and going and toing and froing between the agriculture sector and the oil and gas sector. The second is our regulatory environment, which is both a provincial problem and local to some extent, and more importantly, it's a federal problem. That basically, I think of Health Canada and CFIA, for example, as kind of a tax on anybody who wants to invest in anything, because they're slow, they're inconsistent, they don't make it clear about what to do. They cost you a lot of money lots of times if you want to invest, and therefore you tend not to as a result. Interestingly, entrepreneurs in Alberta tell me that they don't think they have anywhere near as much access to capital from the banking system as they do in the U.S. Because banks here won't go as far on loans as a percentage of the value, and it costs more in some cases. In the longer term, we probably need to worry about our transportation system. It's probably okay for the moment, but the transportation system we have in Western Canada was actually built in the 1890s, and we haven't done a lot with it since, compared to a lot of other competing jurisdictions. So I think those are the main things to worry about in the short term. What do we need to do to improve on that? Well, number one, I think you need a concerted, focused program. I can see the possibility of going into an area of Alberta and saying, we want this to be a value added. Here's all the things we're going to do to encourage people to invest here. Here's another example that I would use. The University of Saskatchewan, Waterloo have really and Guelph to a less extent, but they haven't done it very well or very successfully. But they've really focused on creating an area where people will come and invest. So University of Saskatchewan has all this big research park, and it's attracted all sorts of big companies. And that's Waterloo has become the center of also, I talked about it in the paper, all sorts of things, communication technology and so forth. And I think that's what I'm talking about. I see it. I don't know. I keep leaning toward Southern Alberta because of the water. But I can see taking that Lethbridge area and saying, okay, we want this to be a center for value adding. So here's all the things we're going to do to encourage people to come and invest here. Okay. So does that make sense?
Yeah, like an economic region in a way, like a mega region. Exactly. And that's definitely something that we put in Define the Decade, because that, Alberta isn't just competing against individual states or individual provinces. No, we're competing against mega regions like Cascadia, like the, Waterloo area. And so finding a place where it like the economic opportunity spans geographies, but also multiple sectors is important.
So the reason I have in my head the Lethbridge area is one, that's where most of the irrigation is. That's where the vegetables are. That's where the beef is. And you're not very, you're drawing in grains and oilseeds and so forth because of those already. So it makes sense to me that that's where I would start. Now, it doesn't mean you limit it to that area. And I didn't say that out loud in the paper, because the last thing I wanted was to start some kind of a, excuse me,
interprovincial tip
contest within the province. But that's the one that makes the most sense to me from what I know,
Right. So thinking about just the practical, tactical things that we need to do to really put Alberta into this sphere, in the same kind of category of jurisdictions like Minneapolis, like New Jersey, like California that you mentioned, what needs to happen from a policy perspective? And then also what needs to happen from an investment perspective?
Well, I would say here are some ideas. I'm not sure I've got all the best ideas by any stretch of the imagination, but this is where I would start. Number one, I would probably choose an area or a couple of areas and say, here's an area that we think has great potential. We would like to make it a region of investment and value adding. Within that, we're going to harness our strengths. So especially in the short term, I think that means the water aspect needs to be made, very clear. We're going to have water no matter what, and we're going to move heaven and earth to make sure we get it there so people can use it. And then you need a series of initiatives, I think, that will help overcome the weaknesses. So some of that might be a program to make sure that there's always labor there. And we've got, Canada's got much better programs than the US already. So that's not such a stretch. But where we really need to focus, I think, is on the capital and the regulatory environment in the short term. Okay. So could you do something like, for example, have some government guarantees, not government loans, but government guarantees that would encourage the banks to go at least as far as they do in other regions for value adding. I know there are people in other provinces and even some in high levels of the federal government who understand this regulatory problem we have. It's been well documented, and it really is a cost, and they're ready to fix it. So I think there's got to be, that's a really important one, and there has to be some kind of an approach where you say to potential investors, we're going to fix this regulatory thing, and here's how we're going to do it, because we're going to work together with other provinces and the federal government to come up with a better way to do the regulatory stuff. One of the people I talked to, who is an Alberta investor in these things, said, if you go to the US, the Food and Drug Administration acts like somebody who wants to help you actually invest there.
Right.
If you go to CFIA, they are there to keep you from doing anything. And there's a real difference in attitude, and it's fixable, well, still with the outcome of safety and food safety and that sort of thing. And I think in longer term, the longer term thing is actually to continuously improve that transportation system, because I didn't say this at the beginning, but one of the location advantages of Alberta, compared to Minneapolis, you got access to the Canadian West Coast, the American West Coast, and you got access to Asia, and that's really important.
Totally. So if we can do all the things that you're suggesting, amplify those strengths, close the gaps in some of the areas where we're just frankly not as strong, what do you think the net benefit to Alberta would be? And then what is the net benefit to kind of Canada as a whole, in terms of like jobs, investment, economic growth, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think the investment in jobs they're the obvious things. I don't know if you've ever been to the Minneapolis area, but it's amazing that's the who's who of the food industry around there. And there's no reason why we can't have that in Western Canada. But the other kind of thing is you attract expertise, and you're going to get talent that will enrich the community in many different ways. I use the example again in the paper. Because of the beef industry, you've got feedlot health services management in Okotoks.
It's huge.
It's a world leader.
Yeah.
Would that have happened if we didn't have the feedlot industry? I don't think so.
Right.
Yeah, he probably would have gone someplace else and done it. Because he's invested in other places on other things. So that's the kind of thing that happens. We see the same thing. I've lived near the Waterloo region, and there's all sorts of businesses and expertise that have sprung up that have nothing to do with the original communication stuff, but you really get the offshoots in ways that just totally enrich the community in lots of different ways. As a result of those things, you're going to get growth and innovation and that sort of thing. So I find it a pretty exciting possibility.
Yeah, I mean, we do too. Like, I'm a born and bred Albertan, grew up in central Alberta, so my entire life was ag. So just a final question for you. If there's one insight that you want people to take away from this paper, what would that be?
With climate change and water problems in California, we have an opportunity that we haven't had before. And Alberta's location near the West Coast and the West Coast ports and so forth give it real opportunity, but there's a number of things in the way, so it's going to take focus and action to get those things out of the way to be successful.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and we're excited to see where this particular idea takes Alberta into the future. Thank you for tuning into this special episode of The Brief. You can read Dr. Martin's paper in its entirety at definethedecade.com. We will be releasing new episodes in this series periodically, so make sure that you are subscribed to Alberta Better on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts to be among the first to access new episodes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.